everyone, and welcome to this virtual edition of Ubisoft Keys to Learn. My name's Alicia Judge. I'm a presenter and writer about video games, and I will be your host for today's event. We're here with experts from both inside the games industry and beyond to talk about the role that video games can play in education. There is so much to say on the topic, not least of which because I often say this when I'm going into schools to talk about careers in video games, that there is such an abundance of subjects that relate directly to video games. You look at stories and, language and literature. There is so much to dissect when it comes to character development, to plot, to dialogue. If you're into history, games like Assassin's Creed provide these huge playgrounds to get lost in and learn about history. And if you love physics, well, many games are built with really complex physics engines that you can play with and really play with the building blocks of physics. So because games are so active and so immersive and require such huge teams with such diverse skill sets, there are thousands of lessons that can be pulled for them, which is what we're going to be talking about today. Because now is really the time to start calling attention to that. Education is, of course, a topic that is always important, but in the last 10 months, it's taken on a new resonance as schools have had to shut and learning has gone back in the home behind a screen long distance. Video games have kind of become a way for people to really connect with each other, particularly kids, both with their friends and providing these social spaces, but they can also be used within the classroom. So what challenges are teachers facing and how can video games help support them? That's what we'll be talking about today. And we'll be starting off today's event with a panel discussion. We've got speakers from Ubisoft, Minecraft, Ukie, and Girls Who Code. So if you've got a question for the panel, feel free to share it in the chat. And following our panel, we're also going to be hearing from Judith Brisson, a teacher from Quebec who uses video games in her history classes. She'll walk you through her lesson on democracy in Athens using Ubisoft's discovery tool, Ancient Greece. And she'll share how she adapted that lesson to make the jump from a traditional classroom to a virtual one. So without any ado to further, let's get stuck into our panel and introduce you to our speakers. For our panel discussion today, we are joined by 4 speakers who are here to lend their insight into how video games can really offer educators an important opportunity to adapt to distance learning. We have Maxime Durand, World Design Director at Ubisoft Montreal. He's a historian by trade and has worked on the Assassin's Creed franchise, as well as Ubisoft's Discovery Tool games, which I cannot wait for him to tell us a bit more about. And we also have Andrea Jordan, Vice President of Programs at Girls Who Code, an international non-profit organization working to close the gender gap in technology by inspiring, educating, and equipping young women with the computing skills to pursue 21st century opportunities. We'll also be hearing from Deirdre Quarnstrom, who is General Manager at Minecraft Atlas at Microsoft. Deirdre started the program at Mojang Studios to bring Minecraft to mainstream education, which now reaches millions of students and educators around the world. She currently leads teams responsible for Minecraft education, Minecraft Hour of Code, Minecraft's China business, and she works to make Minecraft more accessible for players of all abilities. And finally, we have Shahneila Saeed, Head of Education at Ukie and Director of Digital Schoolhouse. With over 20 years of experience in computing education, Shahneila helped develop the UK National Curriculum Computing Programmes of Study before joining Ukie in 2014. Don't forget, if you're watching and you have questions for our panelists, type them in the chat and I will pose them to them. But without any further ado, let's kick it off. So, looking at our lovely panelists here, hello guys. Andrea, I want to begin with you. What are some of the challenges that teachers are now facing as they sort of continue to conduct virtual classrooms online?
Sure. So thank you for the question. Just to start off, Girls Who Code's mission is to close the gender gap in tech. And we accomplish this through a series of programs that support students in grades K through 12 and at the collegiate level. Our largest program is our clubs program, and that's an after-school programming model. And many of those programs are supported by clubs facilitators who are also teachers and school administrators that sponsor our programs. They believe very strongly in the importance of exposing their students to CS and the greater impact that it can have on their communities in general. But as an organization, our teachers and administrators are juggling more than ever before. Between virtual and hybrid classes, they are really working to ensure that students and families have access to technology and are working tirelessly to support students' social emotional needs. They're working to implement trauma-based learning and really help families obtain the necessary resources in this critical time. For younger students, teachers are balancing sort of the online mandates and the guidelines provided by their administrations while ensuring that they're able to cover the learning materials in the allotted time frame. One thing that is big for our teachers is that Zoom fatigue is real, and it can be demotivating for young people. And our teachers are working to really motivate their students while providing instruction that meets learning needs and the goals for each individual student.
Absolutely. Mental health and how you manage it in the classroom is huge and something that's been a hot topic for obvious reasons in the last 10 months. Shahneila, what have you been hearing directly from teachers in the work that you do working with schools?
Hello. It's been really interesting listening to all the digital schoolhouse teachers that we work and support. And I think what's had to change is teaching online is not the same as teaching face to face. It's a very different feel. It's a very different setup. In a computing classroom, you're very hands-on as a teacher. You're constantly rotating. You're speaking one-on-one with children, supporting them, and there's lots of different pedagogical styles that you can test and try out. And teachers do their job really, really well, and they're very creative face to face. And shifting that online, you cannot just lift and replicate. It's a very, very different environment. And so you've got to take into account all of the challenges around accessibility, different kids are using different devices, and this kind of real blend. And it's different for primary schools, again, as compared to the older children. So, looking at age 10 and below. The other thing, of course, is what sometimes has happened is where teachers don't have, for example, the digital literacy skills either to begin with. So they might have been there has always been a cohort of teachers that haven't had a great set of digital literacy skills, and they might have been somewhat resistant to trying to learn them as well. What's happened is overnight they've had to be really good at it, and so that in itself is an additional challenge. So we've learned things like, even being able to mute all the children in the class, switching cameras on and off. Those are skills that teachers need to be taught. How do you do that? And then how can you turn those simple tools and turn them into really clever ways of engaging the children? Because keeping them engaged, you've got to do it differently.
I think turning off and on the camera and learning how to mute and unmute is something that we could all learn about. But I mean, Maxime, what is the video games industry kind of doing to support teachers? Are there any resources that are out there and available to really help with the things that Shahneila was outlining?
I think there are many resources that are out there. Of course, I'm very familiar with the Discovery Tour project, but that's one out of many options. Of course, I think there are resources with the Girls Who Code, for instance, that can be soaked by teachers or by educators. There are a lot of lessons that are out there that have been done by people from Minecraft. Also, I've seen that it's a very lively community. As for the Discovery Tour, what I can tell is that I'm very amazed how resilient teachers are. I was from friends and teachers that we're in contact with. They find so many resourceful ways to reuse things that were not meant for online classes, but now they adapt. Judith was going to be one of these good examples, but another example that I want to outline is I'm thinking about this other teacher from Quebec. He was supposed to bring his students into Greece for a field trip, and they prepared the whole semester for that. And so, I mean, from day to day, they just couldn't go to Greece anymore. So, the whole idea of preparing the students to be there, to be able to criticize and prepare for their immersion changed. Yet they were able to use a Discovery Tour remotely, using streaming devices to make the students play the Discovery Tour, be in Greece virtually, and still be able to access and learn the things that were important for the teacher in their classroom context. So for me, that blew my mind. I was so happy to see that. I mean, we hadn't envisioned that a couple of years ago when we prepared the project, but these are some of the resources that are out there, out of so many options.
Absolutely. I mean, Deirdre, the work that you do with Minecraft, can you tell us about some of the resources that are available for teachers who might want to open up Minecraft and start planning a lesson within it?
Sure. Yeah. As the other panelists have said, we see the same challenges with just that sudden disruption, how to bring curriculum that would have been taught in person in a classroom to online spaces, adapting to technology. Another thing that we're seeing that's missing is that social connection between students. And so we've, seen examples in a humanities class of a teacher bringing that content into a Minecraft world. They might have a Romeo and Juliet world that the students can come in together and explore a piece of literature and work together on a presentation. We find that the teachers don't need to be gamers or Minecraft experts to do this. The students are so familiar in gaming environments and online gaming, and they're so enthusiastic to have this creative outlet and this social connection, particularly in places where they're in hybrid learning or remote learning. So it's really been incredible to see just how quickly our teachers have been able to adapt and access the resources.
Andrea, you were nodding your head there at the idea that, teachers don't have to be incredibly literate in games. It's so incredible for students to have video games in their lessons. Is that what you found when you've seen video games be introduced into the classroom?
I would definitely echo that. And I think, one of the things that our CEO, Reshma Sujani, encourages is this idea of being brave and taking risks, right? And so right now, I think we are in an unprecedented time that requires out-of-the-box thinking to really motivate and engage students. So for many of our facilitators who are teachers themselves, they don't have previous experience with coding or gaming. But through gaming, teachers allow students to really build those connections between the curriculum and the game. And so for many of our teachers, we see them learning alongside their students, right? And really providing opportunities for students to help facilitate lessons or to help students take a really active role in their own learning success as well.
One thing that I think would be really interesting to talk about, particularly as people find themselves more at home, is, not every home is equal. Not every home has access to a good internet connection, to a games console even. Shahneila, what have you found for students who might come from lower income backgrounds that don't have access to the latest video games? Are there still ways that video games can be used in classroom to make it accessible to all pupils?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's about the essence of the video game, isn't it? I think video games are the sort of 21st century embodiment of actually play and being playful, and so we can learn a lot about being playful. And there's certainly different ways of doing things, from examples of Maxime was saying earlier about just streaming content out to the children so that they don't have to have a copy of that game at home. Your teacher could have that copy and you're streaming it out and allowing the students to interact that way. It is important for us to be inclusive, but there's also all sorts of things that you can do unplugged, so without the use of technology. And I think Digital Schoolhouse has sort of spent a lot of time producing resources around this, and resources which are centered around games and or be it video games or even things like games that you can play with a pile of Lego or some Play-Doh or something. But just being able to then introduce those concepts using just sort of household items, really. It allows everybody to be able to access that learning in a way that's sort of fun and engaging without always relying on technology. And unfortunately, that divide is there, and it will be there for a short while to come. But I'm hoping that we can all work together to bridge that gap, and soon everyone will have access to it at home.
Yeah, no, of course. I also love, don't you do, you do your pen and paper workshops, and did I hear you also teach code through dance? Is that true?
We do indeed. So we have it's one of our most popular workshops. It's called Just Dance with the Algorithm, and it's the idea that actually a dance is a very strictly choreographed routine, and if you start to break it up, you can turn it into a flowchart. And actually you can teach algorithmic thinking through that. We can teach all sorts of things. You can teach programming, subroutine. I'm not going to go into it. We're not all computer science educators there, but I could go on. But the idea is that children, they can play the game or they can watch a dance routine. You unpick it, you understand the concepts to the point where you're then choreographing your own through a flowchart, and then you digitize it. And it's a great way of getting children to understand that concept of actually just programming and unpicking the way that you go through the obstacles, you overcome those obstacles, those hurdles. It's not intimidating.
No, absolutely. That sounds really fun. Deirdre, you were mentioning a couple of lessons earlier, like Romeo and Juliet, and I'm just intrigued, what are some of the best lessons that you've heard of taking place within video games, whether Minecraft or any other video game?
Yeah, I think there are a couple areas where video games really shine. One is in Learn to Code and coding lessons. We just released our 5th hour of code lesson, which is a Minecraft Tale of Two Villages, where students come across different challenges as they sort of try to help 2 different villages overcome some differences. So within that, we embed social emotional learning and empathy lessons. And so it's a great way that feels very game-like, that feels very creative. And through that, students are learning to write code in Python. We also released some lessons late last year called Lessons in Good Trouble. And that's a Minecraft world that presents different social justice movements throughout history, and it's based on the teachings of U.S. Congressman John Lewis about sometimes we need to get into good trouble to affect change. And again, through that, students and actually families, even outside of the classroom, can use this as a foundation for having conversations about what good trouble is and what transformation is, everything from current events to looking back in history to the U.S. Civil Rights Movement, the British suffragette movement, Gandhi, Malala in Pakistan. And so there's just some really interesting deep learning that's possible when you start from that foundation where, again, it's very accessible, it's inclusive, and people can come together virtually in order to connect and have those conversations.
Sure. And what would you say are some of the things that, say, a maths teacher might do differently when approaching a video game versus, say, a history teacher or a humanities-based subject?
Yeah, sure. So, often an educator will come in with a specific goal in mind. So maybe for the math teacher, the students are just learning how to multiply fractions. And so they're introducing that concept. That can be really done, very basically using the blocks in Minecraft to represent, units of measure. Similarly in a history class or humanities, Minecraft can be a great place for simulations where the students will actually research and then build the environment. So they're taking what they're learning in the classroom and then applying it, being creative. Often they take different roles. What I think has really been interesting for me to learn over the years of working with Minecraft and working with educators and students is seeing that although initially they start out with a focus on a specific subject area or concept or even education standard, what they universally come away with is these 21st century skills development. And so students are learning about leadership skills and collaboration and problem solving. And those really, almost even more so than the concepts, become the lasting takeaways and impacts from game-based learning.
No, absolutely. It's the soft skills, as they say, that are actually super important, and video games are incredible for teaching. Max, we were talking there just about history and how it can be a real tool of learning in the video game world. Have you found that there have been lots of different types of lessons within the Assassin's Creed sort of discovery tour, not just sort of walking through, but really sort of letting students kind of go and explore.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there are as many ways to use Assassin's Creed and the Discover Tour as there are reasons to teach or lessons to teach. On one way, we've seen students in polytechnics and engineering try to understand what was the maximum height for a leap of faith that would be fatal or not, and so it can serve as a discussion point, and then can lead to further questions. And then oftentimes this is what we see with the Discover Tour. It's not only about playing the experience or playing Assassin's Creed. It's more about the context. Of course, I mean, these games can be played in many languages. So just on a game-based learning for languages, this is something that's very strong, because you deeply want to play, you have fun, and you want to continue your experience. And then you can do it in a foreign language. You can change the menus. You can change the language of the dialogues. So these are some options. One of the things that we also see a lot regarding the use of the Discover Tour, for instance, is the use of the photo mode. So let's say I'm your history teacher. I want you to learn about ancient Egypt. You go on and you take a tour about seasons and harvests. So you get to see houses. You get to immerse yourself in something that is quite unique. That is hard to reproduce outside of the game realm. But then the kind of lesson that you can do with your classroom is not only about hard fact history. It's also about soft skills. You can task your students to take pictures using the photo mode in the game, to extract them, and then to present to the rest of the classroom your learnings and your findings. So you do have to do cooperation work. You do have to discuss what you think you have understood, and if it makes sense. There's group work, and I mean, this is even a full circle, because even when we make these games, it's all about group work. So everything that you learn in terms of soft skills, even these hard skills, they all can be super relevant for a future career or for our future needs to give students a citizen role in their society.
Absolutely. You're setting my brain sparking. I mean, even if your class, you can't put 30 people inside Discovery Tour, you as a teacher could just stream it, right? And say if you're an art teacher, you could just put a screenshot on screen and then tell the class, okay, draw what I've got framed on my screen. And then you've got like a series of drawings at the end of the class. There are so many options, right?
What is interesting is that each student could have their own streaming devices and play. Or they could be in teams, or it's just one teacher or one student that controls the streaming. But still, they can all have different experiences that can lead to teaching, that can lead to acquiring new soft skills and collaboration. So in that sense, I'm really amazed to see that there are that many options, in addition to the other support they can find on the Discovery Tour webpage, where they can find more about the content. To me, I'm really, really glad that we're in that situation now, which would not have existed a couple of years ago as for us. So very happy about this.
Absolutely. Okay, we've talked a lot about what you can do within video games in lessons. And I mean, Andrea, I'm intrigued to know, for anyone who might be wondering, what are some of kind of like the technical things that people need to know about running a class in a video game, particularly at home in lockdown learning? Are there any key tips that you have from a technical standpoint?
So with our clubs program, we basically have, worked with our facilitators to provide them just some useful tools to be able to engage their students. So for us, we've talked about, what are the best platforms to be able to support our clubs program, whether or not our students will be joining on Google or Zoom or some other platform to make that happen. In addition to that, we also have just best practices, right, around how to sort of navigate that virtual classroom space, making sure that you're able to give your students voice to be able to support that work, but also how do they, or how do you as the facilitator ensure that there are just rules and tips that allow our students to engage more appropriately in that work. And so for us, it's really been about the platform that we've been using to support our clubs and particularly our gaming, but also then thinking about best practices such as muting, unmuting, how to use the chat, how to ask the questions that are needed to support that work overall.
Absolutely. And how do you make sure that students are engaged? Particularly, I mean, I've got a friend who's a teacher, and one of the things that she's saying that she's been struggling a lot with in lockdown is that she can't see her pupils because for safeguarding reasons, you don't have children on camera. Do you have any tips for basically making sure that everyone is in the game or everyone's playing if they're doing it that way, or if you're streaming it out to make sure that everyone's watching and seeing what you're seeing?
Yes. So for our facilitators, we actually allow them to stream out the video games to their students. So all of the students are able to see it. We use a variety of tools. So we use the chat, we use polling, depending on the platform they're using, to ensure that students are able to really access and ask questions about the video games that they are seeing. We also encourage peer feedback. So in that chat as well, we allow our students to be able to respond and also support with the facilitation of that lesson with our club's facilitators as well.
Nice. So it sounds like there's a lot of options, basically, both in terms of the games that you can play in the classes and also the ways that you can technically incorporate a game, from dance, as we heard, to actually streaming a game, to trying and getting a big class all together within a game. So kind of with all that in mind, what sort of problems does video games kind of solve for long distance learning? If you want to take that, actually, Shahneila.
Okay. Gosh, what types of problems does it solve for long distance learning? I guess it's a number of those. I think one of the things that has become more difficult, depending on certain things, is the contextualization of the topic that you are learning. When children are in a classroom and you're introducing something, whether it's the ancient Greeks or whether it's something else, there's a lot of things that the teachers can do or immerse themselves within and understand the problems or the issue that's being solved, from dressing up as superheroes to all sorts of things. And it really helps the children visualize, and especially when it comes to things like creative writing and all sorts of stuff. When you're online, all of that is a lot more difficult, and for all the reasons that we've sort of talked about here today, and including the issues with cameras and engagement and teachers just really trying to get their head around shifting their pedagogy. So I think video games have a real power to be able to bring that contextualization back, and whether it is via streaming or whether we're using a game that lots of children have access to and is available on multiple different platforms, there's different ways that we can do it. And it's certainly something that I've seen both personally as a parent but also as an educator in practice, and that's really key. That's really key, because it just brings so much together and it allows a real immersive experience.
And when things return to normal, when we go back, gosh, when will that be? But when we go back to physical classroom-based learning, can video games still be used? Like, Deirdre, what sort of video game lessons can be done actually inside a classroom when life goes back to normal?
Yeah, absolutely. One sort of, I guess, benefit during the pandemic has been a real focus on equity and equitable access to education. And that's meant in many places getting devices to students. So, I expect when students are fully back in classrooms, we'll see a lot more laptops and tablets being used in classrooms. And so that provides, really interesting platform for continuing this kind of digital learning that we've been doing. I have two daughters. One of them has dyslexia, and for her, actually using a computer and some of the technology has been really wonderful for her during remote learning. And so, I expect we'll see in places where there are very clear benefits, in some cases, of increased student engagement through using technology, particularly games. That's something that those of us who work in games or maybe spend a lot of time playing games know that games are great at sort of that onboarding and introducing you to how to play. Like they're built and designed to sort of bring you into the experience, which is great for a learning environment. They're also designed to sort of do learning through iteration. So if you play a game, the first time you go in, you probably don't know what you're doing, and you slowly start to learn the rules by trial and error. And you get better as a player, and you get better at navigating the game experience. And that's what learning is essentially, right? It's coming in, learning a new concept, not getting it at first, trying and trying again. And so just sort of reinforcing that learning process and that iterative learning, bringing that from how do I solve this puzzle in a game, or how do I defeat this boss at the end of a level, and having students take that same kind of tenacity and curiosity into all aspects of the learning process, so that when they're first studying a chemistry concept, they think, oh, I'm going to try this, and if this doesn't work, maybe I'll try something else. We have a great chemistry module in Minecraft, which is maybe a bit unexpected, but students can take a virtual Minecraft kind of version of the Bohr model that we probably all remember from a chemistry class. It might be a little bit fuzzy, where you've got the nucleus and you have your protons and neutrons in there and the electron shells, and you can, through using sliders and trial and error, craft all the elements in the periodic table. It creates really interesting applications if you don't have a physical lab space or lab environment, or for students who just want to go explore a little bit more. They can create all the elements in the periodic table, combine them, create really fun things, like make latex from the chemical elements, put helium in that, and then attach that helium balloon to a Minecraft mob and have that fly away. So it creates like that fun gamified experience, but at the core, they're learning chemistry and doing it in a way that's iterative and curiosity driven. So there's so much potential to take kind of like a digital version of what could be done in a lab or a physical classroom, but really more than that, allow that self-directed learning and that student-driven, student interest-driven learning for students to sort of go a bit deeper in a subject area or work at their own pace, and support the educators too, who just only have so much time.
That's so cool. I would have loved to have had a physical model in Minecraft of a cell. That just sounds like such a great visual way to engage with something. We've got about 8 minutes left before we're throwing open questions to you guys. So if you have a question, put it in the chat and we'll pose it to our panelists. But in the meantime, I kind of wanted to wrap up by asking you guys, what are some of the biggest misconceptions that you think society has about video games and young people? Starting with you, Andrea.
So I would say it shouldn't come as a surprise that I would choose this, but I think, there's this misconception that girls don't play video games. And we know that gaming is a male-dominated and can be a male-dominated field, but that doesn't mean that girls aren't interested in gaming. You're looking at a gamer, and I've been gaming since I was 8, and I'm raising 2 young girls who are gamers as well. Yes. We need to really stop assuming that girls aren't interested in gaming. And we know for a fact that girls that identify as gamers, those that are exposed to these types of opportunities, are more likely to pursue a STEM or tech-related career at higher rates. And so we need to continue to advocate for programming that sparks curiosity, and that ultimately exposes more and more girls to the field of tech and to really change the face of tech overall.
Well said. And Maxime, same question to you. What misconceptions do people have about young people and gaming?
Well, I think there are a lot of misconceptions regarding what video games can bring, or also the fact that, well, it's not that important, video games, really. Whereas I think it's a huge opportunity to talk about it. The classroom is an excellent place to have this discussion, to understand what is the role of video games in society. I mean, people are playing it. I mean, a lot of people. To not to talk about it is actually a huge blind spot. So I think it's a huge opportunity for teachers, even if they're not gamers themselves, to get their students engaged, because they want to talk about their games. They're interested to talk about things that are meaningful to them. So whatever the games that are playing, I think it's an important discussion to have in the classroom, and really games are there, I think, to stay. So worth a while.
Right? I think there was an article recently saying that games had replaced music as the most important aspect of youth culture. Not saying that music is, any less valuable. It's just saying that in terms of the hierarchy and culture, video games are really adding new spaces and new ideas for young people, which is really exciting to see. Same question for you, Shahneila. What do you think are some of the misconceptions that people have?
Well, I guess in addition to what fellow panelists have said, it's first of all, it's only or mainly young people playing video games. People of all ages play games, of course, but also predominantly, I guess it's a waste of time and therefore has no place in a school, or at least a school that takes academia seriously. If you want to do it and you're very high profile, highly academic, there's no place for video games here. That's something you waste your time with at home, and that's of course not true, as we've been discussing here. So I think there's still some work that needs to be done around the perceptions of video games and its place in academia.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's a lot of people who kind of look down their noses slightly, don't they? And they have sort of those antiquated worldviews. Deirdre, do you want to round us off?
Sure. Yeah. I'll build on what others have said and add, I've seen a real evolution in perceptions about gaming through the pandemic. We've seen an increase overall in gaming, as you mentioned, like increase in youth engagement with gaming. And I've seen an evolution, I think, in two places. One is in a real growing respect among school leaders, education ministers around the role that playful learning and game-based learning can play in, providing digital skills and some of those social emotional skills and 21st century skills for the jobs of the future. Really what we build when we're playing online multiplayer gaming in terms of relating to other people in virtual environments, collaboration, communication skills, that all has roots in gaming, and there's a real appreciation for that and the technology aspects and just the digital citizenship that comes from gaming. Something else we've seen is I think a renewed appreciation for youth and their voices and their messages and how they can use gaming and gaming platforms as a way to communicate that. I think there's a real, movement among the youth and a way to bring messages around social justice and sustainability, and working across geographies and generations in some cases to come together. It gives me a lot of hope.
Right, Animal Crossing was a great example of that this year, wasn't it? Of people were using Animal Crossing to really engage with politics from all around the world and inviting people to that island that they decorated with different ideas. Thanks so much, guys. That's a really, really interesting discussion. And it doesn't end here, because we're going to move on to some of your questions at home that you've been sending in. So carry on sending them in. And the first question is for Maxime. Someone wants to know, do you know any best practices and concepts for teaching with games that you can tell us about?
I think I did mention it a little bit earlier, but reality is, I think the game itself should not be the end product of the activity that you're planning. It should be part of it. It should be part of a discussion. It should be part of a lesson that is planned. So saying, well, we're just going to play the game and that's it is I think is not sufficient. But it's a very interesting tool. So let's put it into the context. Let's talk about it first. What you're going to do, why are you going to do it, and then asking them to do something, maybe an extra of their game activity. For instance, did you notice? Can you notice some of these elements in your game experience? Once the game experience is done, I think it's important to have place for feedback. It's important to have place for discussion, especially when it comes to history, for instance. History is a very hard topic to teach in some ways, because you don't want only people to retain facts. You want them to be able to interpret and understand and contextualize them. So whenever it's a film or it's a game session that you're asking your students to play, in the end there needs to be room for debate. There needs to be room for critical thinking. Asking them, what did you see and why is it represented the way it is? I think these are very engaging ways for students to participate, and the game itself will shine even brighter, because let's say they use a discovery tour, well, they can say, I saw the pyramid, so I understand now that this is about civilization. So it's the demonstration of an advanced civilization. But why is the pyramid, is it realistic in the game? Why did the developers make it the way it is? And so here there's that discussion that is ongoing. I think that is very important, and it's one of the feedbacks that we receive from all teachers and educators that are using video games, that this is something that is stronger in their use.
Absolutely. That's really, really interesting. We have another question. Sorry, Deirdre, actually, do you want to add in and jump in on that question?
Sure. One of the things that we've heard from elementary educators the last few years whenever we talk about Minecraft is things like kids come into the classroom now and they know what obsidian is in a way that they wouldn't have in the past. And they have this sort of rough idea that obsidian is formed from lava cooling quickly when you pour water on it, based on what they've learned from playing Minecraft. And what we see is exactly what Maxime's describing, is that's the basis for a conversation. That's the basis for a jumping off point. They're not certainly learning everything from video games, but they're coming in with concepts and curiosity. We also had a special ed teacher from New Jersey who designed a lesson where he had students calculate gravity in Minecraft by dropping an item in Minecraft and calculating how long it took to fall, and dropping an item in the physical classroom and calculating that. And it prompted a really interesting conversation, not only about like the equation and gravity, but about objects and about properties, all the way to what assumptions did the game designer make when they built the game. So suddenly you're transforming that into a possible career conversation. So it's really just, it's the part that students are doing in the game is just one piece of it. And it, really provides this amazing opportunity for conversations.
Max, what do you think, responding back to that, do you have any fun facts to jump in with?
Yeah, there are two things that I have in mind. Is that if you want your students to be on time, tell them that they're going to play a video game. So that is one of the aspects that we've learned from teachers. They every time they're there before the class starts. They don't want to leave before it ends. On the other side, video games shouldn't be there every time to keep that motivation high, but it does have a huge effect on motivation. So that was funny to see.
It's a bit like that Christmas carol, isn't it? Oh, I wish it could be Christmas every day. And actually, if you think about it, it probably shouldn't be Christmas every day because it would lose meaning. But it would be great if we did have video games a little bit more than we currently do in the classroom. All right, we've got another question, this time for Shahneila. Do you have any advice for students who want to ask their schools to implement more video games into classrooms? Some schools are still hesitant about this trend, especially old-fashioned universities. It's a really fair question.
It's a fair question. I guess sort of building on Max's point, tell your teachers you'll be on time to all your lessons if they start using video games a lot more, or at least attend more regularly, actually. It's been interesting because as part of the Digital Schoolhouse program, we run an esports tournament annually, and we do a lot of research around that to measure impact. And one of the findings that has come across very strongly is the improved attendance to school for students taking part in the tournament. But I think for a student point of view, I think it's probably worth you sharing your experiences if you're interested in sort of game-based learning, and where and how have you used games, or what aspects of your subject or studies have they helped you with, and share your experience with your teacher. There's all sorts of resources that we can point to, and research, of course, but an easiest thing for a student might be to share some of the opportunities and competitions and initiatives that are out there. So, for example, Ukie Education is at the moment running the Mobo Game Jam, and so there's things like that, and that's an international game jam competition. There's also BAFTA Young Games Designers, and these are initiatives that can either be offered out extracurricular, people could do individually, or the school, they also come with supporting resources. So if the school wanted to build it in as part of the curriculum, then they could do so. But I think sometimes that's the easiest way, get them involved, or show them that here is something that take part in. And you just need one thing, you just need one foot through the door when they see the impact that has on students' motivation and engagement levels, and hopefully the next step becomes a lot easier.
Because teachers must want help, for someone to come to them and say, I've got an idea for a lesson plan, so you've now got more time in your spare time to go have a life. Here's a fully packed lesson for you. I'm sure, the resources that you call out, like Better Young Game Designers, you can literally download PDF packs and give them to your teacher with ideas for lessons, and just, leave it with them and say, just an idea, sort of back away.
And the Mobo Jam comes. Yeah, the Mobo Jam comes with all sorts of masterclasses as well for every aspect, from pseudocode to storytelling and character design and everything else. So the teacher doesn't have to worry about it. And actually, I think if a student offers to take the initiative and organize that competition, or organize the promotion and delivery of that competition in their school, then I think that's a great one, because it's not an additional burden on the teacher to familiarize themselves, but actually it's great skills development for the student, because in terms of career roles and everything else, because there's all sorts of job roles that you can sort of invite into that. So students taking the lead and offering to deliver this themselves is a real positive. I think a lot of teachers would go for that. And then when they see the motivation, engagement and the excitement that it builds up, then they'll want to carry on themselves.
Everyone wins, truly. Our next question our next question links into this. We've got a question for Deirdre saying, we know that video games constitute a great learning environment, but how do we convince, quote, traditional families, this question is in Italy, that you can study and learn efficiently in a video game?
I'll start maybe with a very, very simple approach. And one is just ask your students, ask your kids what they've learned from video games. I think people will be genuinely surprised and encouraged by what they hear just directly from the kids themselves about things that they've learned in games. Beyond that, there's some great and emerging body of research around the impact and benefits of video games and game-based learning. Andrea mentioned some examples with STEM, getting into STEM disciplines and STEM careers that are really meaningful. We see increased engagement when digital games are used in classrooms. So there's some data beyond that as well. Some great books. I think we have Matt Farber, who's a researcher and educator and author, who's planning to join today, who's done a lot of research in classrooms working on this. So there's absolutely evidence of the value of game-based learning. There's the sort of individual evidence from the students and learners themselves. And beyond that, game-based learning is something that I've seen where it's like trying it, like you actually see the benefits. You see the students coming to class on time. You see the students who don't want to leave their seats when the bell rings, when they're, in those times when they're in the physical classroom or when the Zoom call is coming to an end. The proof is there in how students are engaged. And I've also been really amazed by how engaged educators are in this, and it often starts with the teacher's kind of the rule breaker and on the leading edge of technology that brings this in, and they sort of slowly start to see other teachers who maybe are passing by the classroom and wonder why what's going on in there. There's some magic happening in that classroom, and they may try it. And it sort of works its way through the system like that. So it's something that I think, once you try it, you see the benefit. You see the benefit for the student who's in your classroom, for the kid in your family, and it becomes kind of contagious in a really positive way.
Yeah, and there's so many opportunities, isn't there, for people to play video games with their families, sit down with a parent who might be slightly suspicious of video games and open Minecraft or, a game that you particularly love and play it with them, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, we've seen some great sort of cross-generational stories of having a young person in your house interview another relative about their childhood home and maybe build that home in Minecraft. And so it creates this really wonderful connection and almost a sense of nostalgia.
That's such a lovely idea. That's really nice. We've got a question for Andrea. Someone wants to know, do you think that video games can be used in the classroom to support and foster gender equality? And if yes, how?
That's a great question. For our clubs program, we often hear of inspiring ways that teachers and students are utilizing games to further educate their communities. And so for our students, gaming has provided an opportunity to really feel empowered and I think tackle social issues that impact them on a day-to-day basis. So generally what we see in those environments are that our teachers are supporting our club students to create games that combat anything from bullying to educating communities about gender equality and climate change and Black Lives Matter and a host of other important social issues. And so what we've seen is, our students really looking at a topic like gender equality and really providing background information. So generally within the games, there are different stages that our students, really sort of develop that really provide an opportunity to educate their other students or others in their schools around some of the issues that they want to tackle. And so for our teachers, they're working with the students to really understand the topic. What really, what is it that they're really trying to educate their community on and how to use the game to shape their work. And so our girls are utilizing the skills to really, solve everyday problems facing them, their friends and their communities and their world overall.
Absolutely. We have a question here for Maxime asking, are there any supportive materials for teachers to use in Assassin's Creed Discovery Tool in class?
Yes, I'd say it's we still have a long way to go in the sense of providing lesson plans. But out there's a web page for the Discovery Tour where you can see the content that is in both Discovery Tours. There's a link to reach out for the Discovery Tour team. Ever since we launched that page last summer, it's crazy the amount of teachers that have contacted us from different regions in the world, from very different scenarios, from people that are gamers or teachers that have never used a video game before. And we try to help them in providing them the kind of material that we have, the kind of ideas that we can share with them, and if possible, to link them back with other teachers from their regions that we know are using the Discovery Tour. And these teachers are most oftentimes publishing in their own languages the kind of lesson plans that they are using. Just here in Quebec, where I'm at right now, we have thousands of students every year that are using the Discovery Tour. Some of them are using lesson plans that have been created by their school boards, and all of these have been published online for free. As of right now, they're accessible in French, but in many other regions, in many other countries, it's the same kind of situation. So things are adapted by local authorities or local school boards, and then they are published back to be available for teachers. So hopefully we can still continue to grow in that sense in the future, but I think there are a lot of solutions out there. Otherwise, people can reach to the Discovery Tour team for sure.
Great. And Shahneila, really quickly, can you outline some of the resources available with your organisation?
Yeah, so Digital Schoolhouse has a number of resources. We've got our YouTube channel with videos. Excuse me.
Bless you.
Sorry.
That's all right. It is that time. Do you want a second and we can...
I'm very sorry. Yeah, so we've got walkthrough on the Digital Schoolhouse YouTube channel, which you could actually leave children to. It was sort of all built around lockdown, so children follow these at home using video games across different activities. And then on the Digital Schoolhouse website, there are lots of free lesson plans and materials around all sorts of things. These things, including the Just Dance with the Algorithm and the Play-Doh I mentioned earlier.
Great, very important to mention those. And Andrea, really quickly, what are some of the resources that could be found through your organisation?
Sure. So similarly, you can check our YouTube channel and our website for many of our materials. We have adapted lessons and meeting guides that offer teachers lesson plans to support fully remote learning or hybrid instruction. We've created a Code at Home series, which is package resources to support students and parents who are seeking additional STEM learning materials. And these materials are a combination of both plugged and unplugged activities with varying degrees of difficulty. And through that series, students can explore debugging code or building their own meteor game. It's an opportunity to really empower students to become activists and share their topics that they're truly passionate about in changing the world for the better. So all of that is available online.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Andrea, and to all our panelists. I think that we've learned a lot about what video games can do to really help support learning in the classroom, both right now in the specific situation that we're in, but also in the future when things go back to normal. We are now going to move to the sort of practical elements of our Keys to Learn event. We've got a mock lesson from Judith Brisson, who is a teacher in Quebec, who's going to be walking us through Assassin's Creed, or the Discovery Tour in ancient Greece. We didn't get a chance to get through all those questions in that panel, but we are going to have a Q&A after Judith's presentation, so definitely be sure to be sending in questions as she goes. Take it away, Judith.
I'm Judith Brisson. I'm a history teacher. I have over 20 years of teaching experience in Quebec. So I've taught to students between the ages of 11 and 17 years old. For the last 6 years or so, I've been teaching in secondary 1 and secondary 2. So that means my students have between 13 and 14 years old. So it's grades 7 and 8 according to the English system. Sorry. So I'm a teacher and I love my job because I think teaching gives me the ability to captivate my students to projects that not only entertain, but can also help them learn about our history. So last year was the first time that I used video games in class, and I'm really happy to say that it was a success. I knew about other teachers in other schools that used video games before for 1, 2, or 3 classes, but I wanted to make something different, and I wanted my students to have the chance to play video games for the entire chapter on ancient Greece. So my project covered over 15 classes. This year, because of the pandemic, I had to make some adjustment in respect to the sanitary precautions in effect, but still my students really appreciate it. So in order to guide my students in their learning, I gave them a mission booklet. I use mission where Assassin's Creed uses visit. I think the term mission is more engaging. Also, it implies that my students are more involved in their learning. He or she has to accomplish some mission. Inside the mission booklet, there's a list of all the missions they have to accomplish for the entire chapter on ancient Greece. Overall, there's about 10 to 12 missions. I have 2 extra missions for the more eager students. And every mission is related to at least one of the ministry education's requirements. So here's an example of a mission in the mission booklet. So the student has to complete his mission booklet when he or she plays the game. So either by listening to the narrator, by reading the transcription, by looking at the world unfolding before them, or as they interact with a historical character. Also, since not all of my students played a video game before, I made a user guide for them. I know the first time I played a video game was when I started working on this project, and a user guide would have been helpful. Also, I think this guide helps my students develop their autonomy. So with a guide, my students can be autonomous, and while they navigate the game and also accomplish the missions. So they have control over their learning. It's really fun just to watch my students play the game, and they have so much interest and they're captivated. And afterwards, they just raise their hands just to show me how they figured out how to jump over a fence or climb a wall. So it's really fun. And so while they work, I can walk over to different teams and ensure that the work is well done, or I can help them or answer some questions. So the user guide allows students to really engage in their learning. So step by step, the guide helps students navigate the game. So every team has a user guide. So if they happen to be unable to continue, or if they just don't know what to do next, they can always refer to the guide. And this project also forces students to interact with each other. They get to help each other to complete their mission booklet. So here's an example of a mission. I chose democracy in Athens because it's an important concept in our history program. So from the beginning, students get to meet an important historical characters such as Aspasia. And later on, they'll meet Socrates and even Pericles. So video games are really an interesting use of technology because it is stimulating, it is entertaining, and also it helps visualize the basic concept in the historical program. So to play the game, the students are paired with another classmate, and each of them will get a turn to play the game while the other one writes down the answers in the mission booklet. So it's also easy to follow a mission because each team can accomplish the mission at their own pace. So they also have time just to look around and watch the scenery. That being said, they can pause the mission, they can repeat the mission, and they can also read the transcription. And each mission also has a challenge. So for example, there are questions of varying difficulty, there are objects they have to interact with, like archaeological artifacts. Like in this mission, my students have the opportunity to learn more about the clepsydra and its use in the practice of democracy in Athens. The gold line, as shown in the video, shows the way to accomplish the mission. So if students stray during the mission, they can easily find their way back. Still, they know that if they do not accomplish the mission in the allotted time, well, they might lose some privileges. I'll come back to that later. In the end, in order to verify parts of their answers, they have a quiz. So it is fun, and it also marks the end of the mission. And afterward, according to the mission booklet and my instruction, each student can continue to the next mission. As I said earlier, because of the pandemic, I had to make some adjustments so my students can still be active participants in their learning about ancient Greece. So while I have a group of students at home and they don't have access to the game, they log into their Google Classroom and they have to watch a pre-recorded video of me completing the mission. And then they can complete their mission booklet based on what they saw. And some students like to say that I have to continue to practice, but I'm not that good. So for groups that are in class, even though every student in my classroom has a laptop, often it is not powerful enough to load the game. Because of this, each classroom has been equipped with a high-performance computer with the game installed. So due to hygiene protocol, I call one student up at a time in front of the class to play part of the mission. And I would disinfect the keypad and the mouse between the students. So it's still really fun because while one student plays in front of the class, the rest of the class can cheer him up. This medium can also bring some changes in the way students are usually taught. So it is different and thus appealing. In fact, I tell my students to look at the scenery and enjoy the bird's eye view. So by the end of the chapter, I realized that my students found it easier to understand the basic concepts related to ancient Greece, since they could associate them with what they have seen while playing. To further motivate my students, I have a privilege system that gives the teams opportunity to play and have fun once they've finished all the work that I've assigned. I also use the bird's eye view while I teach other notions. So once they play the game, they can easily associate the subject with the game. So once a team finishes the mission, they have to fill a survey on that mission. There are questions on most important concept that I want to emphasize. So the survey grades their performance in addition to preparing them to the end of chapter evaluation. And with each successful mission, my students win privileges. So in order to gain privileges, each team has to finish all the missions and the work to my liking. They have to show me that their mission booklet has been completed, that all of the surveys have been done, and that they have completed all of the other exercises and notes related to the class. But also, every team has to prove that they worked well together, so that they helped each other during the mission and there were good interactions. So these privileges add a challenge and further motivate to work well. And a student that wins privileges has the opportunity to play Assassin's Creed Odyssey just for fun for half a class. It's a win-win. So the use of video games in history class is an entertaining and stimulating way for students to learn. At the end of the chapter on ancient Greece, I noted that my students' grades were better than they were the previous years. And most of all, my students are really happy to come in class. They hurry up. And with their interest and their obvious enthusiasm, my job as a teacher is easier because my students are such in a good mindset for learning, and I'm just more happy to teach them. They've been talking about the game to their parents and to their friends, and I get lots of emails from different people saying how it's such a great idea. Also, the students that I have this year and that started to play the game last year still talk to me about this project today. So in my opinion, a teacher has to constantly reinvent himself and herself in order to captivate students' interest so that they invest themselves in their learning and continue to develop the competencies required to be better world citizens. So finally, the use of video games in class is one way to make the most of technology and to interest kids to stay in school and learn while having fun. Well, thank you very much. And if you have any questions, I'm here.
Judith, that was brilliant. Yeah. So interesting. You must be the most cool, popular teacher at your school.
I don't know. I don't know. I think my students can see that I really love my job, and I try to make the most of it. And I hope that they have fun and they stay in school.
I mean, we had fun just watching it, so let alone actually doing that lesson. I've got a quick question before we jump into your questions watching. How did you make those resources, the worksheet and everything? It was beautiful. Did you have a template? How long did that take you?
Many hours. No, I did that all by myself from scratch. And just for fun, yes, I counted all the hours, but I don't know if you want to know the exact number. But it's been months. Yes, so I was in contact with Maxime Durand and his team while they were working on the Assassin's Creed Discovery Tour. And once the game was ready, I started working on it in August, and everything was ready to go in November 2019. Wow. So my students started the beginning of December 2020. So overall, everything took like 67 hours just for the the mission booklet and the list and everything.
Sure, because there's a lot to chew through, but I think with any lesson, right, with any sort of lesson planning, the more that you set that snowball rolling, the quicker it sort of becomes. So now that you have a lesson in a video game, you've got that template that perhaps can be adapted for another video game or another idea or another lesson. And you've sparked on a really interesting point there of, I think, if teachers want to reach out directly to video game companies are quite receptive, right? They're quite open and probably quite flattered that their video games might be used in a classroom situation.
Yes, I think so. And well, in my case, I think, Maxime was really, really helpful. And I had a chance to meet him for the Congress here in Quebec for the history teachers. And he was talking about the Discovery Tour on Egypt. And I've heard about the one they were working on for ancient Greece. And I said, oh my God, now I'm doing it. So afterwards, they were really open for my questions and what they were going to, what it was going to look like. So it helped.
Which is great. Yeah, you weren't doing all of those hours just by yourself. There was some support there, which is lovely. We have a first question from the audience. Someone wants to know, do you consider the use of video games in the classroom to be a disruptive form of education? We think they mean disruptive in the sort of startup entrepreneurial sense.
Well, for sure it is different because, teachers are not used to this kind of teaching, and the students are not used to being taught that way. But I think it is good because it is different. It is interesting, and still, it's like my students were working so well, and I didn't have to do anything. It's like they were so engaged in their learning while playing, and they were just so captivated that they were working so much. I had to make some extra missions. And that's how I came up with the privilege system, because I had to congratulate them and just for having fun, and continue that way, for it. They had, like I said, they were in such a good mindset for learning. And afterwards, it's like I was asking some questions. Oh my God, it was so good. And they were always they could associate all the concept to the game and what they have seen. It was awesome. It was really good.
It's amazing because the video game just triggers every different type of learning, right? The people who learn by doing, the people who learn by reading, there's so much encompassed in a video game.
Yeah, and like Maxime said previously, when he said that it triggers discussions. Oh my God, it's so true. Because afterwards, when I ask them questions, it's like, oh yeah, but we saw this and we saw that. And they were thinking by themselves and, going further into their learning. So it was pretty cool. So,
yeah, that's fantastic. We have another question from someone who wants to know, do you think that it's enough if the teacher streams the game or only shows a video of the game? Or do you think that every single student should play on their own to get the full experience? Have you heard any feedback from students?
Okay, well, for sure this year, because of the pandemic, yes, some of my students had to watch the pre-recorded video. So I was wondering myself if it would be as fun. I've had some feedbacks and my students really loved it, because even though they don't have the chance to play by themselves, it is different. And with everything happening right now, they can see that still we make an effort, and that it's a nice activity. It's a change of pace also. So they really, really liked it. But afterwards, I take the time to come back on the mission and I ask them some questions. What have you seen? What does that mean? So maybe I have to ask them more questions. I have to make more feedback afterwards with them and with the mission booklet. So, in fact, all the survey part I've been talking about is something new that I added this year to help them, because they couldn't play themselves the game. except for my groups that are in class. Oh my God, they love it. Even though they're not all playing at the same time, they get to cheer each other and I ask questions, for the group, and lots of participation.
Yeah, that's a wonderful idea to have someone up at the front playing and sort of taking turns to engage with the video game in a physical classroom scenario. That's brilliant. We've got another question from a viewer who asks a really good question. Did you have to face any sort of criticism because of this approach? Obviously, I find it brilliant, they say, but I'm very interested in how it was received by families or education institutions or colleagues.
I have no criticism. The contrary, before the start of the project, I wrote to all of the parents and I explained what the project was about. I explained that it's an educational video game, so nobody dies, there's no blood, and so it helped them understand that it was that I aimed to help them learn, and it was all related to the program. And afterwards, I received lots of emails saying it was a really nice idea. Their kids were coming back home and only talking about their history class. So that's fun. And they really like it. My colleagues are really nice colleagues, and they've been congratulating me, saying how cool it is. And students have been talking about it in other classes too. So now, and the principal and everything, they helped me and everything. So no, I had no criticism. No,
that's
only
great.
Good things.
It's fantastic because I think that, we can sometimes, as people who are invested in games culture, we can be a bit defensive of video games and kind of expect criticism, right? And expect to be underestimated. But I think, most people are quite open to games culture now. But saying that, if someone is unlucky, if someone does find that they want to implement a video games lesson and say their boss maybe isn't a gamer and is a bit suspicious of games culture, what advice would you give to them in that situation to kind of sell the idea to someone who is skeptical?
Well, to begin with, if that person never played a game before, well, then he has to try. Okay? I knew about video games. I had never played a game before, but I think it's fun because I was hearing my students and I talked with them, and they were always talking about this new game. So I said, why not? To get to captivate them and really invest themselves in their learning. I have to do something that will interest them also. And I've been looking into the video game world, and with the Discovery Tour, I said that's the perfect thing. And I think that it's you have to try it first. You have to give it a chance, or at least reach out and ask some questions. And afterwards, well, each teacher can decide by himself if he wants to do the project or not.
Absolutely. Well, we've got another question that links slightly to what we were talking about before. They're saying, I'm a teacher in a high school and I use something similar in my classes, but how much time did you need to prepare this lesson? And I know you mentioned earlier, I think you said 67 hours. Is that right?
Yeah, for everything.
It's a long time. But I guess to extend that question, one, do you think that time was worth it? And two, if you were to prepare another lesson, do you think it would take as long as that? Or do you think that you could shorten the process now that you've got the ball rolling?
For sure. The next lesson, because I'm working on something else, my God, the time has been divided in two, at least. But I think one of the reasons it took me so much time is that I made a user guide also, because I knew that I didn't know how to play well video game, and I knew some of my students did not. So it took time to figure everything out. And also I took some time to play the game, to actually play it and accomplish all of the missions and everything. So I think, yes, it takes time. It does. But afterwards, once you know how it works and you have your template, well, you can easily adjust it to another. So it's like a boost you have to do to give at the beginning, and afterwards it pays off. So
absolutely,
that's what I
know. That's great. I've got another question from someone who says, Judith, we've heard a lot about the positives, but what are the negatives about this teaching approach, if there are any? What could be done to avoid them, along with any troubles that accompany them?
Okay, for sure. Well, there's always things that I have to do better the next time. For example, my first missions, I realized that I had too many questions, and also I had too many questions with a high difficulty. So because I realized that my students were so captivated by the bird's eye view and all they've seen that it was difficult for them to do everything at the same time. For sure, it's harder for some students when they forget the work and they just want to play the game. So that's why once they are autonomous, well, I can walk over to different teams and help them and just ensure that they do the work well. But I think, I don't know, I had so much time, so much fun doing it. It's like you have to adjust yourself. You have to make some rules and everything that can satisfy you. So I realized that with a privilege system, it engages the students, and it helped me, to better to better like have a control over my class and everything. So it's fun.
No, that's great. We've got another question saying, I'm not a teacher, but I am a parent and a gamer, and this sounds great. What's the best way to get my kids' school involved?
Well, the first thing I did is I first played the video game, and I went to see my principal. And I told him about what I thought, and I told him about what I had, what was my idea, and what kind of projects I wanted to build. And afterwards, I also showed them all the links between my project and the Minister of Education's requirements, and just to prove to him that it was actually like a nice idea. And afterwards, he said, "Okay, go." So he gave me the okay, and I did.
And the rest was history.
Yes, that's right.
That was a terrible pun. But I mean, I think this particular questioner is a parent themselves. So, I mean, are you open to parents coming to you with an idea for a class? Is that a strange thing to do? If they were to go to their children's teacher and say, hey, I heard about this incredible teacher in Quebec who did a lesson in Assassin's Creed, would you consider doing it? Is that a fair thing for them to do?
Well, I guess so. If they contact me to say, well, okay, so what are the Ministries of Education requirements that are that I work with this project and everything? Well, maybe if they can help, and if it, I think it really a good use of technology that it helps students. So why not help other teachers or parents to do the same?
Yeah. And I think, it's a good time to point out some of the resources that are available online. If you are a parent, I know I can speak for the UK that we've got BAFTA Young Game Designers. That's a competition that has a bunch of different resources for teaching video games and video game skills. So you could perhaps take those and, send them to the school, or let the school know about kind of competitions to do with gaming that they can get involved with. It's slow going, but I think the more that parents engage, right, with their schools and with their teachers, that pushes things forward. And there's also Ask About Games, which I've just been reminded of, which is really true. Ask About Games is a great resource that has lots of PDFs and things online that you can dive into or send to someone who is an educator themselves. Judy, I think that's all we've got time for, which makes me so sad because this has been absolutely fascinating. But thank you so much for sharing your lesson with us. It was so inspiring and fantastic to get just a
thank you very much for having me.
No, not at all, not at all. We hope to hear about more of your video game lessons in the future. Perhaps this time next year you'll have another that you can share.
Hopefully.
Fingers crossed. But I mean, thank you so much for joining at home. You know, we've had a real hands-on perspective of how educators can really use video games with their students. And, you know, I'd like to thank all of our speakers that we've had over this last sort of hour and a half, sharing their knowledge about the role that video games can play in education. We've explored how teachers, even those who don't necessarily play video games themselves, can really use gaming to bring a bit of creativity and fun to distance learning and to the physical classroom when we go back to it, teaching everything from history to English literature to STEM subjects. That honestly, the world is your oyster in gaming. It's clear that video games have a huge part to play in the future of education, and they offer a really unique opportunity as a playground for students to really learn and grow. I hope that what we've discussed here today helps some teachers and even parents to feel really empowered to leap in and discover that for themselves. Thank you so much for watching.